So we're continuing a series that we began called Tools for Brisk. And what is that? That is a methodology of Brisk that was basically started way back when, at the time of the Rishonim, but the Acharonim carried the ball a little further, especially Reb Chaim Brisker. He came from the city of Brisk. And he applied this methodology all over Shas. So we have covered a number of categories so far, and I'll just give you a flavor of what we've touched upon. We spoke about the difference between Gavra and Chefza, which means a person and an object. We spoke about the difference between a din mamon and a din isur, always classifying something under monetary law or under isur v'heter, we'll call it the ceremonial law, ritual law. We spoke, for example, about masa and totzas hamasa, the action and the result of the action. Another few examples of things that we spoke about. A means or an end. Do you remember this? Emtsa'i or tachlit. We've spoken about halacha murkevet, a complex halacha that has many parts to it, and how do those parts interact with each other. We spoke about essential elements and elements which are additional and accidental. They're not absolute. They're not absolutely required. They're not what we call indispensable. We spoke about din kloli and din mesuyam. Is it a universal halacha or a specific halacha? It only applies in this case. These are some of the different categories that we've described, and obviously the study that we're involved in a sense gives us an opportunity to touch on different sugyas in Shas. So it's sort of like like a bee that goes from flower to flower and likes to get a taste, likes to get an overview. For somebody who enjoys touching on different sugyas, I think that this limud, this study, has a very exciting appeal. So on the one hand, we gain a methodology, we begin to think in certain categorical terms, and on the other hand, we're getting a little bit of an overview, of a taste, or a little bit of a spice, if you will, of different sugyas and shas. Tonight, I'd like to introduce a new category, a new tool, so to speak, and it's called hafka'ah, which is spelled Hey, Pei, Kuf, Ayin, Hey. The word hafka'ah is almost impossible to translate into any other language because it has such a specific technical meaning. It's sort of like physicians have their nomenclature. This is a very lavdisha term, hafka'ah. Now, I'm going to try to give a mashal, lamad over doma, just as a kind of a simile or metaphor so that we can get into this. Let's say there was a law that said that all vehicles have to be registered, which means that if you own a vehicle, you've got to go through an entire legal process. It may have to be subject to some sort of a test to see that it meets the standards, that you meet the standards, that you filled out the right forms, you came in front of the right office. It's got to be registered. Now, what's included under vehicles? So what would be your first sort of gut reaction? What kind of vehicle, let's say here in the city of Toronto, would have to be registered?
Taxis.
Taxis? Well, okay, taxis is a very specific case, but taxis is indicative of a more general type of vehicle. What type of vehicle?
Car.
Cars, automobiles, correct? What about bicycles? Now, is a bicycle a vehicle? Does it have to be registered or does it not have to be registered? So supposing the law said vehicles have to be registered, bicycles do not have to be registered. Here we would raise the following question. Why is it that bicycles do not have to be registered? One answer to that question is because bicycles are not vehicles. A vehicle has an engine, it's got 4 wheels. A bicycle has no engine, it has only 2 wheels. The other answer perhaps would be that Einochinami, I have to agree with you, a bicycle is also a vehicle. It travels on wheels, it's a vehicle. The reason it doesn't have to be registered is because the law decided that it doesn't have to be registered. it's not dangerous enough, it doesn't travel at the exact speeds. So again, the first definition says that the reason why you don't have to register a bicycle is because it's not a vehicle. The other definition says no, a bicycle is a vehicle, but it doesn't have to be registered for extraneous reasons. They, so to speak, exempted the owner of the bicycle from registering the bicycle. Why? It doesn't go that fast, it's not a dangerous vehicle, and therefore they said bicycles don't have to be registered. What's the difference between the two? I mean, they sound awfully similar, almost semantically or conceptually different. The difference would be, supposing I found a bicycle that really was dangerous, or perhaps could travel at major speeds. Is there a possibility then that the law would require that that bicycle be registered? What bicycle do I have in mind?
A motorcycle.
A motorcycle. Let's take a motorcycle. A motorcycle is a subcategory of bicycles. It's certainly not an automobile by any stretch of the imagination. But on the other hand, it does have a number of qualities that an automobile has, and therefore maybe it should be registered. Let's go back to our two definitions. Our first definition is that a bicycle is not a vehicle. Would a motorcycle therefore have to be registered? No. Our second definition says that a bicycle is a vehicle, but the law, the government is not so strict about bicycles. It doesn't present that much of a fear, shall we say, a danger, and therefore bicycles do not have to be registered. But if you had a bicycle, that would in some way be dangerous, then we might require that it be registered. If, on the other hand, a bicycle is not even a vehicle, then for sure it doesn't have to be registered. The first definition that we operated with, namely that a vehicle does not include a bicycle, that's called hafka. Bicycle is under the category of hafka. Hafka means it's completely excluded. It was never in the pot to begin with. The other possibility, which is usually used in the Lumdische world, is to say that there's no hafka. In fact, I have to agree with you that a bicycle is a vehicle, but a p'tur. A p'tur means an exemption. Yeah, it's included, it's in the bag, but we're going to exempt it. We're going to say that within the various vehicles that are in the bag, and most of which require registration according to law, there are a few that exceptions were made, and we granted them an exemption. I mean, you can find similar things in every area of law, especially, for example, in tax law. You could say that there's certain objects that aren't taxable, or certain benefits or profits that are non-taxable. They're not included in the law of taxation. That's called a hafka. You could say there are other cases where, yes, we should be taxing you, but we'll give you an exemption. You work for the church, so we'll give you an exemption on paying certain taxes on your salary. That's an exemption. But there are other cases where there's no taxation whatsoever. You wouldn't tax me for the air that I breathe, but you might tax me for the water that I drink. Do you follow what I'm saying? So this is just my metaphor for the concept of hafka. Now, as we apply this hafka concept to halacha, we have a number of possibilities. For example, let's say we talk about the status of an act, which act could be a Maisa Mitzvah, a mitzvah act. It could be a Maisa Avera, an Avera act. And let's say we find a case where you implement that mitzvah or that Avera, and yet you don't get either rewarded or punished for it. Once again, we'd have to ask the question, why? And offer two possible answers. What would be the two possible answers? How do you apply hafka when you're dealing not with an object? You see, with an object, like we said before, a bicycle is not a vehicle according to that definition. That's pretty simple. But when you get to an action, what does it mean hafka with regard to an action?
You mean the concept of chiyuv or not chiyuv?
No, I'm saying there's no chiyuv. But why is there no chiyuv? Is there no chiyuv because of reason A, that's one definition, or reason B, which is operating with a different definition? Reason A, we're going to call it hafka. What would be the hafka in the case of an action? What would I be saying about that action?
Is it different action?
That it's not considered a Maisa mitzvah. It's not considered a Maisa Avera. The other definition would have, yes, I grant you, it's a Maisa mitzvah, it's a Maisa Avera. It qualifies. It has the status. We're not going to apply the logic of Hafkah. But what we're going to apply is the logic of Ptur. We're going to say, yes, you did an Avera. You violated the Torah law. But for one reason or another, we're going to alleviate you of your punishment. That exemption possibility is called a ptur. Whereas the first way of understanding it, it was never included within the brackets. It was never a Maisa Avera at all. It was mufka. It was completely excluded. And we'll see a few examples of that tonight. Let's give another example. Supposing you have an object, but not like the case of a bicycle, which is purely a simple physical object, but let's say you have the case of an object which has some sort of a halachic status to it. For example, you could talk about bread the whole year round, but which 7-day period or 8-day period here in Chutz La'aretz would that bread take on a new halachic status, even though it's the same identical piece of bread? Pesach. And then it becomes what? Chametz. Here I can ask the following question. Supposing the Torah says that I can alleviate myself from all the violations of Chametz if I do X. Now, what is the Torah saying? Is the Torah saying that by doing X, I remove, I undermine the shame Chametz, the status of Chametz is Chametz, that's called Hafkah? Or is the Torah saying, no, it is Chametz, but we'll give you an exemption. We'll give you a Ptur. So once again, whenever you have an object which gains a certain legal status within halacha, you can ask yourself, when there are exceptions to the rule, exemptions, what causes that exemption? What definition is the halacha operating with? Is the Torah saying that in this situation where you have the exemption, you cannot call it by that name? It loses its very status as a vehicle, right? It doesn't have that shame. That's called hafkah. Or are we saying, no, it's a separate independent ptur for reasons X, Y, or Z? Correct? What else? Oh, let's go through some of the cases. I don't even know where to start. There are just so many that fit into this what I call tool. But let's begin with the following question. What mitzvah do we have on Sukkot that applies the entire Chag, day and night? Sukkah, the mitzvah of Sukkah. Specifically, if I asked you, pressed you to add a word before Sukkah, what would be that word? Okay, yeshiva b'Sukkah, right? Or in Ashkenaz, it's yeshiva b'Sukkah, whichever way you like. Yeshiva fits under what kind of category? Is it a person? Is it an object? Is it an action? Where would you place it?
An action.
It's an action. Okay, so now we have something called Maaseh Yeshiva, an act of dwelling or living or sitting in the sukkah, whatever you like. Do I have to sit in the sukkah when it's raining? No. I mean, if it's really coming down hard and it'll interfere with the enjoyment of the sukkah, I won't be able to live there the way I normally live in my house, and the droplets are coming down into my soup, is I don't have the mitzvah of Sukkah, correct? Who can take this chakira, this tool that we're using, and formulate a chakira, two definitions of why I'm not obligated to sit in the sukkah in this case? But I need your help here.
So if it's a hafkah, then it loses the shem sukkah.
Okay, but again, we're talking now about. You may be correct in what you're saying. You might be even better than I am. But let me just follow through with my approach. Again, we're talking about yeshiva as what?
As an action.
As an action. Now you're raising another issue, which again, that is definitely relevant to this discussion, and that's sukkah as an object. But let's focus for one moment on the act of yeshiva b'sukkah. So again. So one definition would be to say if it's raining, if it's pouring, if it's stormy weather, it's freezing cold. I don't think that could ever happen around here, could it? Maybe I'm being a little facetious. But You know, like one woman said to me, she hasn't sat in the sukkah more than twice in the last 8 years, you know, whenever she's very sensitive to the cold. It's freezing cold, right? So I'm exempt from sukkah. So one definition is to say that it's what? Hafkah. What does hafkah apply to?
Not an action.
It's not an action. This would not constitute a Maisa yeshiva, an active yeshiva b'sukkah, according to halachic standards. Or, what would be the second option? Another definition?
Patur.
Correct, it's a patur. The Torah says, you know what? You don't have to suffer. In this case, mitztayer potim in a sukkah, you're suffering here because the rains are coming down. We're not going to obligate you to sit in the sukkah. What would be the difference between those two definitions? Can anybody think of a nafka mina? You know, whenever we have a chakira and two definitions, we always search for the how it cuts ice. You know, what would be the difference? Let me hint this to you again, because I feel I should have gone to dental school here. I'm like pulling teeth. But let's say, for example, a woman is exempt from mitzvah saseh shazman grum, correct? Now, that's called a patur, no question about it. If that's called a patur, would a woman, if she would be so inclined, be able to voluntarily take it upon herself to fulfill that mitzvah? What would you say about that?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, let's get back to, again, I gave you enough hints here, that now you should be able to see where I want to take you. In the case of mitztayer potim in asukah, a person is uncomfortable and therefore he doesn't have the obligation of sitting in sukkah. Would it be a hafkah? It's not a Maisa yeshiva, or is it just a patur? It's an exemption. And then after we what?
So I guess if he or she does sit in the sukkah, is it a mitzvah or
Excellent.
is it nothing?
Okay, and I'm going to just add a little terminology here because again I'm trying to get you into the brisker way of thinking here. Is it, if one voluntarily, okay, that's called is misnadev b'hitnadvut, offers to sit in sukkah under those conditions, would they obtain a kiyum ha-mitzvah? Again, similar to the paradigm case of a woman who takes it upon herself to fulfill a mitzvah seishas mind growing. Yes, she had an exemption, and certainly she was exempt from the mitzvah, but if she took it upon herself, that act of a mitzvah would be meaningful because it's a mitzvah act, and it would generate a kiyum, and she gets brownie points. What would you say about a person who sits in the sukkah despite the fact that it's uncomfortable? If you can apply the logic of hafkah, would it be meaningful to take it upon himself voluntarily to sit in the sukkah? Would there be a kiyum mitzvah? There would be no kiyum mitzvah. It's meaningless. It's not a yeshiva. It doesn't constitute a mitzvah act, and therefore can never generate a kiyum. On the other hand, if I say it's a p'tur, then using the barometer of p'tur as it applies in general in halacha, you want to take the initiative. You want to volunteer to do the mitzvah under those conditions. You don't care about your tsar. You're really haste. You're hot. You're dedicated, devoted. Then you obtain a kiyum mitzvah. Interesting. The Ramah of Moshe Isserles in Shulchan Aruch, in the Siman about mitztayer potim sukkah, he says if the rains are coming down and he sits in sukkah, eino ela hedyot. Hedjo, that's a very heavy word. I wouldn't like to hurl that word at anybody. That's almost as bad as calling someone a shagans. It's a hedjit. Hedjo means he's an amoretz. He's just an ignoramus. Meaning it's pointless. It's meaningless. What definition was the Ramah apparently operating with? Kafka. Good? So you're getting the flow, you're getting the feel of it. Now again, we haven't even touched the iceberg because this kind of approach will apply over and over and over again. Let's take the case now, we've been speaking about an action, let's shift over to a person. We have in halacha distinction between what we call in English an adult and a minor. In Hebrew, in Lobdisha terms, we call it a gadol and a katan. What's the status of a katan? Is a katan liable for his actions? Does he have any sense of liability? Or in other words, does he have an avera? No, he's exempt. Who can apply now the principle of hafkah in the case of a katan? Yeah.
So his exemption, is that because his act is not an act?
Correct.
Or is it because he just has a patur?
Excellent. Do we say that a katan in his actions is not capable of what we would call halachically a ma'isa avera? His act is not called a violation, and therefore he's mufka. We apply the principle of hafkah. Or should we say that for technical reasons the Torah gave an exemption? It could be very, very possible that this mature, precocious child at the age of 10, 11, or 12 is capable and liable and responsible for his actions. Nevertheless, we cannot punish him. What might be the difference? The Gemara tells us above a comma that Rafram damaged someone's property when he was a katan, and therefore he couldn't be sued in a court of law for damages under Nezikin. Even though Adam Muad Liolam, a person's always responsible for his actions and has to pay for any damages that he incurs, but nevertheless, Rafram in this case was a katan at that time. What question might come about here? Can you think of an afkamina?
Would he have to pay when he becomes a gadol?
Excellent, beautiful. Would he have to pay when he becomes a gadol? If his act is not a ma'isa avera, it's not a ma'isa hezek, if he's completely excluded, as we said, he's not in the ballpark, he's not a vehicle, like you'd say, human beings, have to become citizens of their country, but animals don't have to become citizens. So there are humans and there are animals. No offense to animals. I'm not trying to insult animals, but they aren't human beings, so they're out of the ballpark. Do you follow my point? They're not in the bag. That's called hafkah. So do we say that a child, in a sense, is like any other creature on the face of the earth who's not at all responsible for his actions or her actions, and therefore the katan or the ketana would be completely mufka? Or do we say no? The Torah gave an exemption clause, but maybe that exemption clause, maybe, I can't say definitely, might only apply in a limited way, as long as the child is still a minor, before bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah. Then you cannot sue them in a court of law. Once they become a bar mitzvah, then they can be held responsible for even actions that they initiated as a katan. And the Gemara says that he paid when he became a gadol. This inclines me towards the direction of saying that a katan is not mufka. He's not completely bumped off from a ma'isa avera. Any questions so far?
I thought the parents would be responsible in this instance, no?
Well, no. I mean, actually, the Gemara says in Perek HaChovel, Pgi Asan Ra'ah. It's a really bad situation, because you can't collect from the child, you can't collect from the parent. There's another case of an Eved, where your Eved is no worse than your Shar. So since you own an ox and you're responsible for not being careful about watching and guarding your ox, the same halacha might apply to an Eved. At the end, the Gemara says we're going to alleviate the master of paying for his Eved's damages, because otherwise, every time the Eved gets angry at his master, he might just, rip things apart, and, do a deliberate act of damage, and then his master will be sued.
If you make the minor pay when he's a gadol, then you're really making him responsible. Just you're not making him.
Wait, I didn't understand what you said, Chaim.
If you're making the katan wait till his gadol to pay for the action that he did as a katan, then you are making him responsible.
Correct. So then what we're saying is it's a technical exemption. Now you begin to see that within the context of Hafkah versus P'tur is really just a technical. And if we could just circumvent that technicality, then we're back to square one. So for example, in my mashal that I gave you at the outset, if you were to take a motorcycle and call it a bicycle, but on the other hand, the bicycle also should be registered, except that for technical reasons, X, Y, or Z, they alleviated the responsibility in this case. But let's put bicycles back into the original bag as they were, and say there's no hafkah, just the p'tur, and that p'tur doesn't apply in the case of a motorcycle. So to the extent to which a katan could be responsible for his actions, why not include him in the entire bag of what we call a ma'isa avera, and just say that the Torah alleviated punishment or payment or whatever other responsibilities and expressions of that responsibility, but he's culpable when he becomes a god. As long as we can circumvent that technicality.
It's a deferral.
It's a deferral, it's a technicality. You know, it's kind of like what you'd call, I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase, a temporary blockage. No, the water really is flowing, but you put up a dam and that stops the water from flowing. Just remove the blockage and it keeps going. That's kind of a p'tur halacha. But then sometimes the halacha operates in a much more far-reaching way with hafkah. And when you have hafkah, you can stand on your head and do whatever you want. You're still left outside the pale of that halakhic responsibility. Okay, let's give another example. You remember we touched before on the sugya, the category of chametz, right? Chametz means it's leavened bread the whole year round. It's not called chametz, and comes Pesach, and it's called chametz. So chametz now takes on a new identity. It's not just, as we said, a piece of bread. It's not just pas. It's not just the product of the 5 species of grains. It's chametz. Now the Torah comes along and says that you could be mavatel your chametz. That's what we call bittul. Okay? Can I have a chakira, gentlemen? 2 definitions of what happens through bittul. What is the Torah telling me? That all I have to do is make this declaration that the chametz in my mind is considered ki afra diara, like the dust of the earth. Hafkah p'tur. Can you operate within that frame of reference?
So I guess if it is a hafkah,
right,
then you know what? Even if you see a piece of bread, you know how.
Oh, you're already a step ahead of me. You're already up to the nafkaminas. I'm not ready for nafkaminas just yet. What is your first name?
Alex.
Alex. So Alex, tell me before you get to nafkamina, what would hafkah mean in this case of bittul chametz? What does bittul do if it's hafkah?
It's no longer chametz.
Exactly. It removes the state of chametz. Now you'll ask me, wait a minute. I just took this to a lab. It has the exact molecular structure that had it before I made the bittul. Obviously, nothing in the material world has changed, so none of the scientists have noticed anything. But halachically, in terms of the difference between what we call pas, bread the whole year round, and chametz on Pesach, something now through bittul has changed. Bittul gives me the ability to be mafkia, to undermine the shem chametz. It doesn't have the status as chametz, or no? It's a p'tur. The Torah says chametz is chametz is chametz. I don't care if you recited bittul, even if you were sincere, bittul b'leif, but it's still chametz, is it not? It's a p'tur. Torah says that, you know what? Once you have implemented the bittul, we alleviate your responsibility, and you don't violate bal yirah by matzah, the various lavin, the various isurim in the Torah. Okay, now, Alex, I'm ready for an afkamin.
Oh yeah, so you still have to throw out the bread, you see, because it's still a chametz, as you said.
I think what you're touching on, Alex, is the following question. Again, I'm going to just try to reformulate it in my language. What would happen if I ate this piece of chametz? Like you're saying, let's get rid of it because you might come to eat it. Well, if I remove the shem chametz, it's not chametz. Complicated. And again, this would be way beyond the parameters of our discussion tonight. But sometimes you could have what's called a hafkas shem chametz with regard to bal yirah by matzeh. In other words, it's not chametz in terms of ownership law, but it still remains chametz in terms of bal yochal chametz, the law that enjoins you from eating the chametz. So again, the physical, material reality of chametz on Pesach, that enjoins me from eating it. Then that's chok v'lo yaver. That's an absolute rule. What we're raising here is the possibility of being mafkia the shem chametz as far as the law of ownership that tells me that if I own chametz, I violate bal yirah v'yamatzeh. Well, let me share with you a chiddush, an insight of the Ramban. The Ramban, in his chidushim on Masechta Pesachim, touches on the following issue. Is there a difference between hefker, which means the declaration that something is ownership? In this case, I declare my chametz as being ownerless, and anyone can come along and grab it and possess it, and bittul. And the Ramban notices 2 things. First of all, he notices the formula of bittul is very radically different than that of hefker. In fact, the word hefker, or let this be ownerless, doesn't appear, that phrase doesn't appear anywhere in the expression of bittul. Bittul is a strange kind of expression. Let it be like the dust of the earth. Point number 2, and this is very fascinating. The Ramban has a Yushalmi, a Talmud Yushalmi, that says that if you make your chametz hefker, but it's still within your domain, you remain in violation of the prohibition of Bal Yirah B'Motzei. And only if you go a step further and you declare your chametz mevutal through bittul, only then are you allowed to leave the chametz around. Again, there may be also rabbinic problems with that, but on a Torah level, you don't violate Bal Yirah B'Motzei once you've recited bittul. So my Rebbe Rav Soloveitchik said, what is really the Ramban telling us here? What is the difference between bittul and hefker? And he said there's something fundamentally different. Hefker doesn't have that powerful element that bittul has. Namely what?
Okay.
So what are you saying? Is hefker have hafkah or doesn't have hafkah? I didn't understand what you're saying.
Not have.
Does not have. Good. It just doesn't make 100% sure. Hefker is lacking hafkah. There is within the various technical reasons or requirements in which you violate Bal Yirah B'Motzei, one of them is that it should not be hefker. If you make it hefker, so that sort of covers you, it alleviates you. But it still remains chametz, and it's in your possession. And maybe, just maybe, you would violate Bal Yirah B'Motzei on it, even though you made it hefker. In other words, hefker might not be sufficient to cover your bases in all cases, in all situations. And the proof of the pudding is the Ramban's Yerushalmi, that the Yerushalmi says even after I made it hefker, if I have it laying around and I see it within a close proximity, I violate Bal Yirah B'Motzei. But how would I obviate the problem of the Yerushalmi? Through bittul. Bittul is mafkia b'shem chametz. And that explains why bittul is a totally different formula than hefker. Hefker touches on whether it's mine or it's not mine. Is it within my possessions legally or is it not? Bittul, on the other hand, ka'afra diara, what I'm saying is, this is not significant in my eyes. I have the power to be mafkia shem chametz. And that would be the power of bittul called hafkah. Now again, there's another way of avoiding Bal Yirah B'Motzei, which we didn't even discuss tonight. What's the alternative to bittul? It's hashbasa, meaning sreifa, for example. You go out as we do on Erev Pesach and we burn our chametz. There, the whole question, the whole issue of hafkah is totally irrelevant because the chametz is gone. It's physically out of the universe. That, in a sense, is the optimal way of getting rid of your chametz. But the halacha recognizes a second method, an alternative approach, and that is hafkas shem chametz. So biologically, physically, it remains the same chametz as it was a minute ago, but yet somehow I'm able to be mafkir the shem chametz. Okay, now we get to something that's a little bit more complicated, but we'll give it a shot. This is the concept called the onus. Aleph Vav Nun Samach. The source for this concept of onus in the Torah is a parsha in Kiteitzei, in Sefer Dvarim, that reads Vilanara lo tased davar, which literally means we cannot punish this girl because she was raped. And that's your classical case, your extreme case of onus. Now, there are other cases of onus where, for example, I'm very ill and I need to violate something, in order to get the medicine down and so forth and so on. That's a different kind of onus. But let's focus now on the case of onus in a kind of rape situation where you have, the action was done against your will, you were coerced, and you actually did what would constitute an avera, but you did it by onus. Gentlemen, two definitions. Obviously, under onus, la nara lo saseh davar, there's no punishment. Lo taseh davar. What are the two possibilities? Hafkas, maisa avera or ptur. Is she guilty of an act, albeit ba'onus? There would not be any punishment, but you cannot deny that the act is a Ma'aseh Avera? Or no, is the Torah going one step further and saying that the act itself is not considered a Ma'aseh Avera? It's mufka. It's completely out of the ballpark. It doesn't register as a status of an act of an Avera. Similar to what we discussed in the case of Yeshiva B'Sukkah, when it's coming down, it's pouring rain, we remove the act of a mitzvah, in this case the mitzvah act of Yeshiva B'Sukkah. Here on the flip side, in terms of the Avera, we're saying that Ones might have the capacity to go as far as being mafkia, the status of the action. What would be a nafkamina? So, take for example, as a Mishnah in Masechta Yevamos that discusses the following scenario. A married woman, her husband goes off, I don't know where, and two witnesses come and testify that we saw him dead. So what does she do? After the time period elapses, Beis Din says it's okay, and she gets remarried. And lo and behold, she's married to the second guy, and her first husband comes alive on 2 feet. Again, those two witnesses are in deep trouble, but that's not what I want to focus on. Does she have to bring a carbon? The law is that any violation, even if it's not deliberate, an unintentional violation of an avera, sheyesh bo kares, a severe violation, requires a carbon. What would you say? Does she require a carbon? What?
Is the punishment death?
Well, no, she can't put her to death because she relied on two witnesses.
Okay. But
do you follow what I'm saying?
But you're saying that, okay, but
it's an unintentional violation.
Right, no, this is not intentional. In fact, in the second marriage, I don't want to tell you which chief rabbi was the Masader Kiddushin who married her off to the second guy. So I wouldn't say that she gets the death penalty. I'm asking a different question. Does she have to bring a carbon?
What's her violation?
She had an adulterous act.
Well, isn't the punishment for that death?
But only when it's deliberate.
Like honest.
How can it be not deliberate? Does it?
Well, now you're getting into heavy issues about what constitutes deliberate. But let's just simplify it and say that if a person has a license to get married, and that license was given to them by the courts, who relied on these two witnesses, turned out that these two witnesses were not the most reliable fellows, as we know, then such a person cannot be put to death for doing an action which was totally, what word am I, licensed, or I don't know, I'm looking for a different word, by the, what? Legal by the legal system. It was legalized totally. So my question is not, would she get the death penalty? I mean, she's certainly not guilty of a crime. But did she do a Ma'aseh Avera? That's my question. The nafkamina would be whether she brings a carbon. You see, in the case of Lanar Lo Sasa Dover, the classical paradigm of Ones, there everything was done on her body without any action on her part. She was totally passive. It reminds me of the sugya that we discussed once in Sanhedrin about Esther being karka with regard to Achashverosh. But be that as it may, in this case, where she was raped, V'lanara lo sasadov might very well be, and that's how Reb Chaim Brisker always understood it, a hafkas Ma'aseh Avera. It's not a Ma'aseh Avera at all. And therefore a woman who was raped would not have to bring a carbon according to this logic. But in the case of a woman who relied on two witnesses, and therefore she got remarried, that's okay. I'm not going to throw the book at her, like you say, she's not guilty of a capital punishment, but she did a Ma'aseh Avera. And a Ma'aseh Avera requires a kapara. Kapara means an atonement. And in this case, which kapara do we bring? A carbon. I'd like to discuss with you a fascinating sugya, which is called Beged Laila. What's Beged Laila? We call pajamas, things that you wear at night. This is apparel that's designated for night use. You don't usually wear it during the day. Supposing you would wear it during the day. So the issue is, and it's a sugya Masechta Menachos, whether you're chayv in tzitzis. The law is that a Beged Yom is chayv in tzitzis, according to most Rishonim, even B'Laila. That means if this garment that I wear, let's say my tzitzit, right? I wear it during the day, then even at night I wear it and I get a mitzvah. People mistakenly think, oh, let's take off the tzitzits. No. As opposed to a Beged Laila, which even if I wear it during the day, I don't put tzitzis on. I'm not obligated to put tzitzis on. Clear? So we have a distinction here between two categories. We have garments that are worn generally during the day, and they have to have tzitzis on them even if worn at night. And you have garments that are generally designated for night use, and even during the day they don't require tzitzis. Okay. Now, we're going to focus on Beged Laila. And we're going to ask, why is Beged Laila exempt from tzitzis, even during the day? Two possibilities. This is a little bit more challenging. Anyone want to take a stab at it? How would you apply hafkah in this case?
So is a muvka from the category of beged?
Exactly. Beautiful. Excellent. Good. That was good. I tell you, either something's rubbing off here, or you were a genius before you started learning this. Because I'll tell you the truth, it took me years and years of training to come up with that idea. What is it? Is it a hafkas beged? Meaning, the Torah says that a beged, to generate a chiyuv tzitzis, has to fit certain conditions. And a beged laila is not called a beged. What should I say? It's like a garment that has 3 corners and not 4 corners. It's completely mufka from the parish of tzitzis. Or do we say no? What's the difference between this beged and a beged yom? They're identical. They both have 4 corners. That beged generates tzitzis. But there's a separate p'tur called beged laila. This hakira, these 2 definitions, have a tremendous impact on the entire concept that we mentioned briefly before we touched on it, called mitzvahs aseh shazman gro. Because when we talk about a time-bound mitzvah, what we're saying is that the time element creates a p'tur. That the p'tur in this case, from this mitzvah, called mitzvah X, is somehow related to time. Which of our 2 definitions would justify the conclusion that tzitzis is a mitzvah aseh shazman gro? Would it be the hafkas shem beged, or would it be the p'tur?
P'tur.
Excellent. Because if it's hafkas shem beged, that has nothing to do with zman grama whatsoever. The Torah is defining which gadim obligate me in tzitzis. So beged A generates a chiyuv tzitzis. Beged B does not. What does that have to do with zman grama? But if we're saying no, even a beged laila generates a chiyuv tzitzis. But the fact that it is related to a certain specific time, namely laila, that creates a p'tur, an exemption, then you've got a case of mitzvah aseh shazman gro. And in fact, if you open up to Kedushin Daf Lamed Dalet, you will see that the paradigm case of a time-bound mitzvah is tzitzis. And women are exempt from tzitzis. So Tosfos right away asks the question, what do you mean? There's no moment in time that you're exempt from tzitzis. If you have a beged yom, you're chayv in tzitzis laila. So the mitzvah of tzitzis is 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. There is no period of time which is completely excluded from the mitzvah of tzitzis. Why does Gemara classify tzitzis as a zman groma? That's your paradigm case of a zman groma. I mean, that and tefillin. And so Tosfos answers, very strange answer. He says that since the zman yom is goreim the chiyuv, and the zman laila, in the case of a beged laila, is goreim the p'tur, therefore it's mitzvah aseh shazman groma. So I heard once my Rebbe Zechron Lefrach, he said in the Havamina, when Tosfos raised this question, he understood that a beged laila is not a beged. It's hafkas shem beged, as far, just like we said that through bittul you remove the shem chametz, through laila, these pajamas are not called a beged. Let's call them second-class begadim. So they're not enough. They haven't reached the standards of beged in order to generate a chiyuv tzitzis. So Tosfos says, if that be the case, then take a beged yom as your example of tzitzis, and the answer is a beged yom is always chayav in tzitzis, 24/7. Why then is this a zman grama? Tosfos answers no, but the laila is gorim the p'tur. It's not that the beged is not a beged as far as tzitzis is concerned. It is a beged, but laila is a poter. And if a laila is a poter, that makes it into a mitzvah aseh shazman gro. Okay, gentlemen, I think we'll stop here at this point, and I want to thank everyone for coming. And we still have a lot more to do on this topic, so maybe what we'll do is next week we'll finish up on this topic. I want to talk to you a little bit about something called a lav bar chiyuva. It's a sugya that I did recently called yesh shliach l'dvar vera. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about the concept of misasek. And then we'll move on to another tool for bris. So stay tuned.